read the scripture very expertly, by the way, if I can say, to Doreen and Rosie and Harry. There are those couple of puzzles and picture things on the back if you want to engage with that. And if you want to just listen along, I'd certainly encourage you to do that. Today we're going to be looking at this portion in Mark chapter 5. We are going to look at how Jesus deals with both a healing and something that's beyond the healing, that of someone actually being raised from the dead, which is pretty amazing. And I thought to myself, you know what, in today's world, it's a very debated topic, this thing about healing. And I've had many conversations, lots of talks with people of all sorts, of all different persuasions and how they view it and the frustrations and so forth. And I know when I first met Doreen, we had many discussions over time. And if you don't know Doreen, she's had lots of issues with her feet. And I think it was on the first surgery that she was wheeled down into the operating theater that she was absolutely convinced that God was going to heal her and not need the surgery that she was facing. And for whatever reason, God chose not to heal her. There's a difficult thing. There's questions of, does it happen today? And I am convinced it does happen today. How does it work? I don't know, apart from God does a work that only God can do. How does God choose who He heals and who He doesn't heal? I don't know. I need to pull out my card. On the card it says what?
I don't know.
No? What? Well done, Pete. Well done. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things, the enigmas, the mysterious things belong to the Lord. However, there's lots of stuff that's out there, and I'm going to throw out a name. I'm going to see if you recognize this name. Peter Popoff. Oh, Allison's heard this name. Peter Popoff. Let me just read you a brief bit about this. And this is why some of the controversies are brought up so much. This is from the true source of all knowledge, which is what? What's the true source of all knowledge? That's right, Wikipedia. Peter Popoff was exposed in 1986 for using an earpiece to receive radio messages from his wife, who had given him the names, addresses, and ailments of audience members during the Popoff-led religious services. Popoff falsely claimed God revealed this information to him so that Popoff could cure them by faith healing. That is heinous. That is ridiculous. So this is a lot of the type of reason that people get so agitated when they hear of these things and these proven phonies who are out there. But as the Bible says that Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. If Jesus could heal back in the day that He was around, Jesus can certainly heal today. If you want to move off from the sun, I totally get it. And Chris, I realize you're follically challenged as I am, so don't feel like you have to stop in the sun, okay? So today we're going to be looking at two particular instances of what Jesus does, and some very interesting things that we see. So today we want us to see, number one, that Jesus can heal today just like He did back in the day. If you were to ask me, as we said, how does He do it? How does He choose? I don't know. But He certainly can. But secondly, and even more important than this, I want us to see Jesus in a far bigger way. I want us to see Jesus as the great physician. I want us to see Jesus as one who has power over not just physical ailments, but over death itself. And I know that I've been doing this vicar stuff, this minister stuff, this pastor stuff long enough to know that anytime someone hears the C word within their family, either themselves or someone within their family, fear strikes you like nothing else can. And I think quite often when people are faced with this idea of death, it can be a very, very frightening thing. Now for the believer, I know that it's difficult because We're not designed for death. God did not design us for death. He designed us for life. He designed us for life. But because of sin, death is a reality. So we're going to take a look at this. Now, you do have some papers. I know we don't have a screen up here. So what I'll do, I'll shout out the words that go in there. If you need some help with spelling, Chris will help you, and we shall be all
Be here
right.
all day.
What's that?
You'll be here all day.
Be here all day. Well, we can't have that. Can't have that. We got dinner to go to and all sorts of things. Whatever you're having, whatever Pete is cooking is what we're having. Okay.
You want me?
We're not eating today then.
Oh, yeah.
I'm busy.
You're busy. You are cooking dinner.
There's two distinct stories here. Oddly enough, the first story about the man who comes and asks Jesus, and the man's name was Jairus. He comes and asks Jesus about what was the relationship of the person who is very, very poor. It was his daughter. His daughter was very, very, very poor. He comes to Jesus and he begs him. Let's quickly read that little section again, starting in verse 21, just to remind ourselves about it. It says, "Now when Jesus had crossed over again by the boat on the other side, a great multitude gathered to him. And he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came." Interesting. "Jairus by name." Does anyone know Jairus? Is that a common name? No, never heard of one. Jairus by name. "And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be healed, and she will live.' So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him." First of all, we have to be careful about boxes. That's the first word, boxes. Boxes. Rather, I'm not talking about the kind you get from Amazon. I'm talking about the kind where we put people into boxes. Are we good at putting people into boxes, by the way? Can we look at somebody who's walking down the street and make certain assumptions about them? Do we do that? Of course we do. Of course we do. We have to be careful about that. Here it is, Jairus. What do we know about Jairus, by the way?
Not a lot.
He was a bloke, first of all. Where did he come from to meet Jesus? Where did he come from? He came from the house with the rulers of the what was it? Synagogue. And what was a synagogue back in the day? And even today, what is a synagogue? A Jewish meeting place. Okay, they wouldn't call it a church, but a Jewish meeting place. And we know that the vast bulk of the Jews, the religious Jews, what did they see? How did they see Jesus? How did they see Jesus? They saw Jesus as a nutter. They wanted to get rid of him. And we've seen that multiple times throughout Mark already, that he wanted Jesus just to go away. They didn't like what he was saying. He was challenging what they were saying. And they said, "We just don't want any of this around here." However, Jairus was different. What did he do? He came out. His daughter was very poorly. He came out and did something absolutely amazing. We're going to highlight that in just a second. However, let's think about just a minute so far. So far in Mark, we've seen all kinds of healing being done. We've seen physical healing. We've seen spiritual healing, demons being cast out and so far. And there's various groups that we've looked at. Okay, here are the words that I'm going to give you. First of all, there were the scribes and the Pharisees. This was what kind of crowd would it be? What word could fit in there? This was the religious crowd. This was the religious crowd. Jesus just did not fit their mold. And they didn't like it. They didn't like it one bit. The scribes and the Pharisees were the religious crowd. But then there was the tax collectors, the sinners. So what did they do? Well, they often were sitting around eating and talking with who? Jesus. And did the scribes and the Pharisees like that? No, they didn't like that one bit. They said, "Who are you to sit down with these sinners, these tax collectors, these nasty people?" That's the second sort of group we looked at. Then there's those who are physically healed, and there were, and here's the word, many of them. There were many of them. There was the one in particular that we looked at. I think Simon looked at. There was the man who was a paralytic. He was paralyzed, and then this was the whole thing that they let him down through the roof, and they broke the roof away, and they let him down through the roof. You remember all that? And then Jesus asked the question, which is harder? For me to say your sins are forgiven, because the scribes and the Pharisees, they didn't like that. Jesus said, which is harder for me to say? That your sins are forgiven, or to get up, rise up, and take your bed. So Jesus said, just to show that he had the power to forgive sins, he said to the person, he said, rise up, take up your bed and walk. That's what he did. So that's the third group, those who were physically healed. And then there's a fourth group, those healed of what kind of possession? Demonic possession. Demon possession. Lots of those. Lots of those. There was a man who we just recently looked at, who who had within him, and the word was legion. And did you catch the number? Do you remember the number of demons that were within this man? Now we don't know exactly. We just kind of maybe have to connect the dots just a little bit. But how many? Doreen, you'll have to close your ears on this one. Okay, she doesn't like this. I can appreciate that. How many of these poor little piggies went running off the cliff? Oh dear. How many of the pigs, you remember, had run off the cliff up to their demise because these demons had gone into these pigs? You remember how many there were? There was a lot. Okay, there was a number actually. Do you remember?
Was it 900?
More than 900. Not quite 10,000. 2,000. 2,000. Now, if we presume that there was a demon per pig, there again, I do apologize for all those pigs. If we can presume that there was a demon per pig, then we can presume that there would have been how many demons? 2,000. Can you imagine that poor bloke? Can you imagine that poor bloke having 2,000 demons living within inside of him? You can imagine why he was in the mess that he was. But Jesus freed him, Jesus healed him, and this is a man that wanted to stay with Jesus. Interesting. But then we looked at the 4 kinds of seed, but there is 2 groups in general that we looked at. And so there were these people in general, those who liked Jesus and those who didn't like Jesus. Isn't it funny? Back in the day, there was the 2 groups. And today, lo and behold, roughly there's 2 groups. Those who like Jesus, those who don't like Jesus. Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. Pretty much the same. Pretty much the same. So amongst those who like Jesus, my challenge for us today is, how much do we make of Jesus? Do we see Jesus as we need to in order to grow as a believer? Do we see Jesus big? Do we see Jesus power? Do we see Jesus beyond just to coming on a Sunday morning and just listen to someone blather on for 30 minutes or an hour or so? So here is Jairus. Here is Jairus. I'm going to call, this is a bloke who was a round peg in what kind of a hole? In a square hole. That's the word that's missing. Jairus, he was a round peg in a square hole. And why do I say that? Someone may ask, Eric, why do you say that?
Why do you say that, Eric?
I'm so glad you asked. First of all, he came out of this house of rulers of the synagogue. Now, there's debate over whether he was one of the rulers, but certainly he would have been respected in the community. He would have had a role of some sort, whether as a teacher or whether he took care of stuff, but he was involved in some way. However, what did he do? He ran to this person that all the religious crowd hated, and he fell at the feet of Jesus. What does that communicate? What does that say? What does that say? If someone falls at the feet of Jesus, what does that mean? That means that, we don't know exactly where he was in his faith. But quite possibly, we see him at a breaking point. You know what? The reality is, when it comes to our kids, that's where our heart is, isn't it? When our kids are hurting, we are hurting. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Lots of stories and lots of things kind of flood my mind, but this is where this bloke was. And you know what? I think he was at the point of utter trust in Jesus' ability to heal his daughter. I think he was becoming tired of carrying the company line. I think he was becoming tired of all the religious crowd telling him, you know what, stay clear of this Jesus bloke. Don't do anything to do with him. You know what? They're all Bible bashers. They're all wackos. They're all weird. Stay away from them. But this bloke was saying, you know what? My daughter's hurting, and she's near death. And I'm pulling away from you all. And I think what is there, but maybe not spoken, is that he is taking his reputation and the gossip around the coffee pot in the morning, and he's throwing it all away. Because can you imagine what the others would be saying about him after he had done this? They'd all gather around and say, can you believe that Jairus? Well, I can't believe it. All the time that we've invested in all the things that we've allowed him to do, and now look what he's doing. He's running and throwing himself right at the feet of the very one that we want nothing to do with. That took some guts. That took some strength. I wonder, could each one of us fill the shoes of Jairus? Could we say, you know what? Am I so bothered about my reputation? Am I glad to wave the flag of Jesus? Am I proud? Am I a big C Christian? Or am I a little c Christian in that I'm okay to come along on a Sunday and even have a bit of a sing-song, and I'll throw a bit of money into the box, but anything more than that, no, I don't want to face any ridicule from my friends. I don't want to get any mess. I just want life to be nice and sweet. You know, this Jairus, he was a different kind of a bloke. He was definitely a round peg in a square hole. And he was willing to show it. But here's what's kind of funny. So Jesus then left with Jairus to go to where his daughter was, and all of a sudden, we get this other story that kind of breaks up in the middle of that. We come to this woman. So we need to be careful about mysterious women. Yeah, that's a nice little word. Be careful about mysterious women. What a great story. What a great story. And I think I was fully expecting, now maybe he said it underneath his breath, I thought Neil was going to say, all women are. You did? Okay.
We're going to secret mic with him.
Peg that one right. Okay, very good. Okay, good. I know Neil better than I thought I knew. Excellent. Be careful about mysterious women. So this woman, what do we know about her? Her name we don't know. It's just a woman. It's just a woman. However, there are some things that we do know about her. Let's quickly read this to be able to remind ourselves. Okay, I am mindful of time, by the way. Up to 21. Where did I stop? Oh, there we go. 25. Now, a certain woman, a certain mysterious woman, had a flow of blood for 12 years. And had suffered many things from many physicians. And she had spent all that she had, run up her credit cards, and was no better. However, rather, she got worse. How bad is that? When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. And the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." What an amazing thing. This woman, bleeding for how many years? 12 years. Now, quite probably, this was let's see if I can get this word right. Gynecological, is that the right word? Woman thing. Probably a woman thing. Can you imagine? Now, I'm not a woman. For that.
I can imagine.
I know, dear. I know.
Well, he's a woman.
But it wasn't 12 years, though, I'll tell you that.
No, it
It
wasn't 12 years,
years.
but I felt like it.
Felt like it was 12 years, I know. 12 years. And truth be told, they didn't have the stuff back then that they do today. 12 years. The Bible says that she had taken all the money that she had, all the resources, had spent it all on all the current physicians, any doctor stuff that she knew or had heard of. But it didn't get better, but only got worse. What a horrible, horrible thing for this woman. Now here's the thing that's not said here. You may think this unfair, and that's okay. But there's lots of cultural and ceremonial things within the Jewish system. For example, if a woman was in her time, can we say that? She was in her time, she would be considered ceremoniously unclean. Unclean. Okay? So there was a period of time that the woman could not go to worship and could not do things because she'd be unclean. And there were certain times after she'd have a baby and all these very strict kind of things. So if that's the case, then for 12 years, she couldn't go to church. For 12 years, she would be looked upon, because word would get round, right? Word would get round. For 12 years, she would be looked on as unclean, ceremoniously unclean. If she was to touch anybody or anything, then that uncleanness would be transferred onto that thing. I tell you what, aren't you glad that we live in the day that we are living? We don't have to fall. Wow, what a tough thing that would be. But here she is. She comes up in this crowd of people. And so she was meant to be social distancing, but she wasn't. And not only that, but she went up and touched Jesus. Verse 33 says this, "But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her." She was fearing and trembling what was going to be said about her. But she had heard about this Jesus person. She heard that he could do amazing things. She heard that he could heal people, and and here's that next word. So you got the number 12. The next word is desperate. She was desperate. She was similar to Jairus in that she had come down to the last straw. There's nothing else that she could do, and it's strange. It's quite often that's when we grow the most. When there's nothing else that we could do, nowhere else where we could turn, when we're down to the last pound in the bank, or our child's sick, is when our heart reaches out and grasp at anything that we can grasp onto. And I'm thankful that not only Jairus, but this woman was able to latch on to Jesus. And I wish it wasn't the case that these kind of extremes are the things that we need to grow our faith, but it often is the case. And look at what she said. Look what she said. It's so interesting. And she says, "If I can only grab hold of him, and if he would put his hands on me and pray this hour-long prayer over me and do all these religious things, then I'll be better."
No.
Is that what she said?
No.
What'd she say? If I can only, I don't even have to get above that. If I can only touch the hem of his garment, just that very bit that's right down near the floor, right down near his feet. If I can only do that. Oh, hello, my love. Hello, my love. You all right? Come on through. Yeah. Hello, sweetheart. She said, if only I could touch the hem of his garment, then I would be healed. Do you think that demonstrates a bit of faith? What do you think? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. I remember this story back in the Old Testament with a chappie called Naaman. If I said the word Naaman, does anyone recognize that? Yes. 1.5. Okay, a couple more. Yeah. Naaman. Okay. Let me give you the brief 1, 2, 3. Naaman was a commander, a Syrian commander. However, do you remember what disease he had? He had a disease. It was leprosy. He had leprosy. And certainly if you had leprosy at any time in history is bad, but certainly back in the day it was a terrible, terrible thing. Naaman had leprosy. Naaman tells his gaffer, I've got this issue. His gaffer sends him to Israel because he hears about things. The king there in Israel doesn't know what to do. However, there's a prophet called Elisha. Heard of Elisha? Yeah. Okay, there was Elijah, and then there was Elisha. Elisha hears about it, summons Naaman, and then tells him to do this. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the Jordan, and I want you to take a quick dip. How many times? Do you remember? What's a good Bible number? 7's a good number. That's it. Well done, Vicki. Get an extra, I don't know, get extra one of these bars too, okay? If you want.
No, you're all right.
Elisha says, go to the Jordan, dip 7 times in this river, and you'll be healed. What do you think Naaman did? He says, excuse me, I came all the way here. It took 5 buses. They were late. Again. And it took me all this time to get here. Now you're telling me that's what I need to do. Surely there's got to be some massive religious ceremony, and bring out all the bells and whistles, and set up the PowerPoint, and get all the video stuff rolling, and worship songs and everything, all this hoop. Surely that's what we got to do. And then Elisha says this. He says, it's amazing how that if you ask you to do something simple, but you'd rather do something difficult. Isn't that weird? And so Naaman turns around and says, okay, so he went in, dips himself once, twice, maybe. I'm wondering how he does this. Does he do once and then, no difference? But then it takes a little bit of obedience. Goes down again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold on now. Well, you did say 7. 7th time, came up and, woo! It says the skin, if I remember the words, skin is that of a baby. Skin just like, maybe it's just like what was, I can't remember the exact word. The point is, he had to dip 7 times just like Elijah, but it wasn't a complicated thing, it wasn't a ridiculously silly thing, but it was just like that woman who reached out, and because of her trust in Jesus, not that there's anything special within that garment, but because of her trust in Jesus, she... verse 56 of chapter 6 of Mark, let me just read this to you. It says, wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, he laid the sick at the marketplace. They laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Word got out. Someone sent out an email, posted it on Facebook. Hey, this Jesus is something really special. Amazing. But then back in Mark chapter 5, we're coming to the end now, so hang in there. Mark chapter 5, real quickly. Verse 30, Jesus says, to this woman, he said, about this woman, he said, who touched my clothes? Now hold on, let me just ask you something really quickly. Is Jesus God? Yes or no? Real quick. He is God, okay? Do you think Jesus had to ask the question, who touched my clothes? No. He knew who touched his clothes. Of course he did. Why did he say it then?
Because you wanted her to admit it.
He wanted her to admit it. But then, here's what's interesting. It's a bit of comic relief, this. Here we go. Who touched my clothes? He said in verse 30. But his disciples, in verse 31, said to him, excuse me? You see the multitude thronging around you, and you say, who touched me? How silly. How silly. So the next word that you're missing there is B. The disciples do it again. The disciples do it again. The reason why I say this is that those disciples, they've got a lot to learn. And they're still learning, and they will be forever learning. Just like us, by the way. Just like us. They say, what? This crowd is pressing on, and you asked, here's the next word, who touched me? What a silly question to ask. Because the answer is, what's the answer?
He knew.
What's the answer? Who touched Jesus? Okay, but there's the woman. But practically speaking, everybody, you've been down Donny Market before, right? On a big day, Christmas market or whatever, they're jostling around before social distancing, which we all observe now. Jostling around, bumping into each other, which I struggle with. That's why I don't go down to market very much. Just the crowds, ugh. And they say, what are you talking about, Jesus? Of course, people are touching you left, right, and center, but there's something different. Though many people must have touched him, Jesus being God discerned this, and the next word, Jesus discerned the woman's what? Heart or need or faith. Jesus discerned that woman's faith. And he turns to her, and he says some amazing things. He looked around in verse 32 to see who had done this thing in the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that she who had this thing going on for 12 years, knowing what had happened to her, she came and fell down before him just like Jairus did and told him the entire story, told him the whole truth. And in verse 34, he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. This next little blank, Jesus calls her as, what's the word?
Well.
Daughter. Can I tell you something? This is the only time in all of the Gospels, the only time that Jesus refers to any woman as daughter. How intimate, how amazing is that? Then he says, daughter, your faith has made you whole. And then he says, go in peace. Go in peace. That greeting, that word that would be used would be shalom, which would be the Jewish greeting. They can use it for a greeting, as a blessing, in all different sorts of ways. And I know that he just didn't imply physical relief, but a relief from the spiritual struggles that she may have been having, and a wholeness to her. Can you imagine 12 years? 12 years of having this. And that's the only thing that she could be thinking about day and night. But she meets the Master. And Jesus brings her a wholeness of life. But then let's finish up. As we come back to Jairus now. While he was still speaking, verse 35, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, your daughter is now dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Number 3, some boxes are indeed boxes. Now here's why I say that. These others weren't like Jairus. They were truly round pegs in what kind of holes? Nope. They were round pegs in round holes. Because they were the ones who said, this Jesus, what are you doing? And interesting, they didn't refer to him as Lord or Master. They called him teacher. So they did recognize him as a rabbi, as a teacher, but nothing special. That's the next word. So some boxes are boxes. Most of them lawn in that house were round pegs and were in round holes. Jairus was a round peg in a square hole. They referred to him as teacher. And I find it interesting that these lot, who would know the most, referred to him as teacher, but the demons, back in Mark chapter 5, referred to Jesus as Son of the Most High God. Wow. Wow. So here's an opportunity. Now this next missing word is opportunity. Here's an opportunity. Jesus speaks. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler, "Do not be afraid, but only believe." Only believe. They only had to believe. They only had to trust. Because here's what was happening. During that time, if someone would have died, it was very, very common practice for people to mourn and wail. And sometimes if you see videos, I think this still happens in the Far East. Yeah. People would actually, believe it or not, people would hire professional mourners. Because the louder the noise, the more wailing and carrying on showed your grief was that much more. If you only had a small handful of people, they'd hire people to come in, professional mourners. Don't know if I'd like that job, but that's what people did. And so Jesus did something amazing. So he took, we're not going to read it just for time's sake. Jesus took the mother and the father, Jairus and his wife, Peter, James, and John, and went up to where the girl was, and let's pick it up there as we finish out today. Verse 40. And they ridiculed him. And when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was. Verse 41. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha Kumi, which is that Aramaic bit that Rosie said, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. And he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. Notice, the faith of the woman brought healing that we read earlier on. But the faith of Jairus, the father, brought healing through Jesus to his daughter. And this is some of the problems that people have. There is no formula. And that's the last word that's missing. There is no formula. What God does is what God chooses to do in God's timing and in God's way. To say that there's some special formula that must be done in order for people to receive healing is totally unbiblical. But the point is that for Jesus to be honored, that he is Lord not only over disease, but over death itself. The last thing that people fear. And so this is what I just want to leave you with, and I want to encourage you. Because in actuality, you know what? For people to understand that Jesus is Lord over all that is far more important than the healing itself. Because isn't it true that eventually that little girl who was brought back to life, one day, eventually, Allison, what? She died. She died. And so it's far more important that people understand that who Jesus is and what Jesus can do for our lives. If Jesus brings physical healing, fantastic, wonderful. But my point is that the spiritual healing, the forgiveness of sin, far outweighs any physical healing that he could do within our lives. And not that that isn't important and that we want to be praying for that God would meet all those needs. But we want to see Jesus as able to heal, but also we want to see Jesus as Lord and King over disease and Lord and King over death itself. And that one day, that for all of us who will come to that day, that we don't have to fear. For all who have received Jesus into your life and into your heart, we don't have to fear of that day. Because the Bible says
Paul says. He says, to be absent, can you help me with this one? To be absent from the body is to be, you know this one? Present with the Lord. So it seems as though it's for the believer, the moment that you finish, the moment that your eyes close in death, that you meet the Lord, the God of all creation. What a prezi that is.